The day was off to a great start. I had successfully dodged the inevitable morning traffic on the way to work, and when I got to the office, wonder of wonders, there was a parking space right outside the front door. An hour after I got to work, Natalie, my secretary, looked into my office and said that Tom Snelling was on line 2 waiting for me. I picked up the phone, said good morning, and then listened as Tom told me that, after thinking things over carefully, he had finally decided to sign the contract. It was a deal I had been working on for almost 2 months, and it was a contract worth over $6 million for my company. Tom said the signed contract was faxed to me right as we were talking. I thanked him warmly, and after he hung up, I went over to the fax machine and sure enough, the contract was already there. I took the documents and headed to Barry's office. He's my boss and the owner of the company, and I asked his secretary to see if Barry could spare a few minutes. She checked and he appeared to be available, so I went into his office and told him I was here to brighten his day. I handed him the contract and he looked at it and smiled. He told me that he didn't think for a minute that I could get anything with Snelling. Several other employees had tried, but had gotten nowhere. Barry smiled and said that my bonus, based on the deal, would be obscenely large, and then he said it was time for me to get back to work. At 11 o'clock, Stella, the boss's secretary, called me and told me that Barry needed to see me urgently. When I went into his office and wanted to sit down, he told me not to bother and I wouldn't have to stay here long enough to get comfortable. Then he told me that as of noon today I was the new vice president of sales, and that one of my first tasks as vice president was to get on a plane to Dallas and smooth the ruffled feathers of Mike Thomas, who was one of our biggest customers. He told me that Stella had all the details and sent me on my way. When I picked up the paperwork from Stella, she asked me if I wanted her to organize my trip, but I thanked her for the offer and said I could handle it myself. Back at my office, I tried to contact my wife Terry to tell her the good news, but I was told she wasn't at work, so I left a message that I would call back later. I headed home to pack my bag for the road, and when I pulled up I saw Terry's car parked in the driveway. Weird, I thought, as I parked behind her. As soon as I opened the door of the house, I knew what was going on. Oh God, yes. Come on, hurry up, love. Echoed throughout the house. I went to the bedroom door and saw Randall Cunningham, who was her boss at work, sleeping with my wife. They were so into it that they didn't even notice I was standing in the doorway, and they were making so much noise that they couldn't hear the clicks my cell phone was making as I took their pictures. I quickly went through the pictures to make sure I had clear pictures of both of their faces, and then quietly walked out of the house. It took me 25 minutes to get to the firm, and when I got there, I asked the receptionist if I could talk to Bart Sampson. We knew each other pretty well, and he stood up to greet me and offered me his hand as I entered the office. Good to see you, Rob, but if you've come to ask Terry to lunch, you've wasted your time, because she's not here. I know exactly where she is, and I also know with whom. I'd like to show you something. And I showed him the pictures on my phone. When did you take the pictures? About half an hour ago. Where? At my house. They didn't even notice me when I took the pictures. They're supposed to be having lunch with one of our clients. He checked the file cabinet on his desk, read me the number and asked, Terry's cell phone number, right? I nodded affirmatively, and he picked up his phone and made the call. We waited, and finally his call was answered. Terry? Your husband is here in my office, and he just showed me some very disgusting pictures of you and Randall that he took about half an hour ago. You both need to come back here and pick up any personal belongings you have here and go into human resources and get a final paycheck. I don't want any trace of either of you still in this building by 5 o'clock this afternoon. A brief pause followed, and then, no, Terry, we have nothing to talk about. Goodbye. He hung up and said, I'm sorry, Rob. I had no idea there was anything going on between them. What are you going to do? Divorce her? No, I meant as far as my company is concerned. Nothing. Even if you have a CPNP that prohibits what they were doing and you had to enforce it, it's obvious to me that you had no more idea what they were doing than I did. I'm just sorry I won't see you again at corporate picnics and parties. I stood up, we shook hands, and I turned to leave, but before I got to the door, he said, "One more thing before you go to the lawyer." I turned to face him. "I never dealt with your company because your wife worked here, and I was always concerned about the conflict of interest. Terry doesn't work anymore, so call me sometime next week, okay?" I smiled at him and said, "I will definitely call." So I left to look for a store where I could buy everything I needed for my trip to Dallas.